Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. Puyi was the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, and his private life has long been a topic of fascination for many. Particularly, his marriage to Empress Wanrong attracted much attention. There are rumors that after Wanrong married Puyi, she developed a strange habit of never closing the door when going to sleep at night. In ancient China, women's boudoirs were highly private spaces, especially at night, when doors were usually kept tightly shut for privacy and security. So, why did Wanrong leave the door open? Was she not afraid of someone barging in? What story lies behind this strange phenomenon? Let's step into Puyi's private life to explore. On December 1, 1922, the Republic of China had been established for 10 years. The last emperor, Puyi, who had abdicated, held a ceremony to enthrone his empress in the Forbidden City. However, compared to the grand ceremonies of his ancestors, this one seemed both shabby and unique, marking the complete decline and end of the Qing dynasty. Aside from Empress Wanrong and consort Wenxiu, very few other people were involved in this wedding. Though simple, it had a profound impact on the fates of these two women, especially Wanrong. As the last empress, she was not only a symbol of history, but due to her mental illness and opium addiction, she was regarded as a madwoman. In the end, her fate was tragic. She died in prison, and her remains were never found. According to historians, even though the Qing dynasty had long fallen by 1922, Puyi's wedding continued to follow Qing dynasty traditions. Wanrong and Wenxiu retained their titles as empress and consort due to the Republic of China's preferential policies toward the Qing royal family. Based on the abdication agreement, Puyi was allowed to continue living in the Forbidden City, and all the ceremonies and titles were retained according to Qing customs. In other words, despite the change of regime, Puyi still lived a life similar to that of an emperor, with a small court, isolated from the outside world in the Forbidden City. While the outside world experienced drastic changes, Puyi continued living like a former emperor. Although the Shanghai Revolution had overthrown the feudal monarchy, democratic and republican ideas were not yet deeply rooted in society. To stabilize the government, the Republic of China granted Puyi and his family substantial privileges, and in some ways, maintained the influence of a constitutional monarchy. As a result, Puyi and his family continued to enjoy royal treatment, with the government providing an annual allowance of 4 million taels of silver for their living expenses. After their marriage, Wanrong's beauty and talents moved Puyi, and their married life was briefly happy. However, in such a turbulent era, anyone's fate was like a floating reed, constantly pushed along by the currents of time, ultimately unable to escape the arrangements of fate. The complex love-hate entanglements between Puyi, Wanrong, and Wenxiu were a product of the instability of that era. As an emperor of a fallen dynasty, Puyi's power was entirely dependent on the support of others, and this position was inherently uncertain and fragile. In this context, how could Puyi's marriage possibly be stable? Particularly after the Beijing coup in 1924, when General Feng Yuxiang drove Puyi out of the Forbidden City. He lost his royal privileges and status. This was when cracks began to appear in his marriage. By 1931, consort Wenxiu, unable to endure the pain of her marriage and Puyi's neglect, took the rare step of filing for divorce. This was an extremely rare event at the time, as in feudal society, a royal consort initiating a divorce was tantamount to challenging the authority of the old regime, and for Puyi, this was undoubtedly a great humiliation and shock. Wenxiu's departure filled Puyi with great humiliation and anger, which he directed at his other wife, Wanrong. The fragile marriage between the three of them nearly collapsed completely with Wenxiu's departure. The sweet married life Puyi once shared with Wanrong was long gone. In his autobiography My First Half of Life, Puyi stated, "Neither of them was my wife, what I had were mere decorations to solve different problems." This statement reflected his indifference and cruelty towards marriage, as well as his disregard for both wives. Puyi's neglect and indifference towards Wanrong filled her with endless frustration and anxiety. Especially after Puyi was under Japanese control. Wanrong became a prisoner under strict surveillance by the Japanese, losing her freedom. Wanrong, on the one hand, had normal physical needs, but on the other hand, unlike Wenxiu, she was unable to decisively choose divorce and free herself from the shackles of marriage. Wanrong, having received a good education since childhood, was proud and spirited, believing in gender equality, and often acted coquettishly in front of Puyi, trying to gain her husband's attention. However, after Wenxiu's departure, Puyi blamed Wanrong, believing that it was she who had forced Wenxiu out. This caused Puyi to develop a dislike for Wanrong, and he gradually began to neglect her. Wanrong's inner loneliness and suffering could not be expressed, and she could only confide in the palace guards around Puyi. She began to develop ambiguous relationships with them, even becoming pregnant and giving birth. To escape the pain of her reality, Wanrong became addicted to opium. In the end, she passed away before reaching the age of 40, her body weakened by illness, and her mouth devoid of a single intact tooth. According to the account of the last eunuch, Sun Yaoting, the tragedy of Wanrong's marriage had been evident from the start. Who was Sun Yaoting? He was known as China's last eunuch, having witnessed the final secrets of the Qing court. After the fall of the Qing dynasty, Sun Yaoting was selected to serve Wanrong in the Forbidden City. In his memoirs, Sun Yaoting mentioned that after Wanrong became Puyi's wife, she gradually developed a strange habit: she never closed the door when going to sleep at night. As empress, Wanrong's position in the Forbidden City should have been very prestigious. And in an era that valued propriety, it was considered very impolite for an empress to sleep with the door open. According to Sun Yaoting's recollections, it was only after Puyi left that Wanrong would allow someone to close the door. Puyi did not often visit her room, and even when he did, it was only for a brief moment, which had become a well-known secret among the palace staff. Thus, Wanrong's habit of leaving the door open was, in fact, a way for her to wait for her husband's return. During the long hours of waiting, Wanrong often faced unfulfilled hopes and endured endless loneliness and coldness. In addition to this, Sun Yaoting described Wanrong as a rather easygoing person who was not harsh with the servants and had harmonious relationships with the palace attendants. At night, the eunuchs on duty were even allowed to rest in side rooms. During those long nights, Wanrong kept the door open, hoping for some company. At least she could see the eunuchs and palace maids standing outside or hear the sounds from beyond the door, which would prevent her from falling asleep in the silent darkness. Historical records indicate that Wanrong was only 16 years old when she married Puyi, still a young girl. As for how Wanrong slept, Sun Yaoting also mentioned that apart from the eunuchs, there were no other men around her. Therefore, when Wanrong slept, she would merely hang a curtain in front of the bed, serving as a symbolic barrier. Moreover, Wanrong had another unusual habit, which was bathing. She never bathed herself but would sit in a bathtub, allowing palace maids to wash every part of her body. For women from noble families like her, being served in such a way was a matter of habit. They did not find it improper to expose their bodies in front of their attendants. There was even a joke at the time that went, if you want to distinguish a noble young lady from others, just have someone help her dress, and observe her expression. Noblewomen, accustomed to being served while dressing, would naturally show no discomfort, appearing composed instead. While the truth of this joke cannot be verified, it does reflect the adaptability of noblewomen to a life of being served, where exposing their bodies was not an embarrassing matter. However, Wanrong's indifference to being cared for while bathing, and even sitting idly for a long time afterward, still seemed rather peculiar. She would sit quietly for a long time, doing nothing. Some people speculated that she was admiring her own body in front of the mirror, taking her time to dress. Although these behaviors might seem unusual, Sun Yaoting did not consider them problematic. On the contrary, as someone who had also been oppressed in the feudal dynasty, Sun Yaoting deeply understood Wanrong's situation and even felt pity for her. Despite her noble status and the luxuries she enjoyed, these honors were ultimately illusory and could be destroyed at any time. Some historians have commented that Wanrong, though the mother of the nation, lost her freedom, the right to choose love, and the respect and affection of her husband, living in isolation in the palace. Had she not entered the palace, with her education and curiosity, she might have been able to change her fate, becoming a woman of the new era, pursuing a career and leading a life of greater value. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.